Stop whatever you are doing right now. Seriously, put everything down. Because what is about to happen in the California desert starting March 4th is not just a tennis tournament. It is a full-scale invasion, a cultural earthquake, a moment that the Women's Tennis Association, tournament directors, top-seeded champions, and every single person who has ever claimed to understand the business of professional tennis is completely and utterly unprepared for. Because Alexandra Eala, the 20-year-old queen from the Philippines, is heading to Indian Wells. And she is not coming alone. She is bringing an army. She is bringing thousands upon thousands of passionate, flag-waving, voice-shredding, heart-on-their-sleeve Filipino fans from across the state of California and beyond. And they are going to turn the Indian Wells Tennis Garden into the loudest, most electric, most emotionally charged venue this prestigious tournament has ever experienced in its entire history. The fifth Grand Slam is about to get a new heartbeat, and its name is Alex Eala. Let us just take a breath for 1 second and truly absorb what is happening here, because the sequence of events that has led to this moment is one of the most extraordinary stories in professional tennis in recent memory. 12 months ago, Alexandra Eala was ranked outside the world's top 100. She needed a wild card just to get into the Miami Open main draw. Nobody outside of die-hard tennis circles knew her name. She was a talented young player from the Philippines with enormous potential, a Rafael Nadal Academy pedigree, 2 Grand Slam junior doubles titles on her resume, and a fire in her eyes that anyone paying close attention could see was going to become something special. But she was not yet the phenomenon. She was not yet the name that was making tournament directors rethink their court assignments and crowd management strategies. She was not yet the player that was sending shockwaves through every locker room on the WTA tour. And then Miami happened, and everything changed forever. As a wildcard entry at the 2025 Miami Open, Eala registered back-to-back top 10 wins over world number 5 Madison Keys and world number 2 Iga Swiatek, becoming the first player from the Philippines to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal and the first to enter the WTA World Top 100 ranking. Let that sink in for a moment. A wildcard player, someone who needed to be invited into the tournament because her ranking did not grant her automatic entry, walked into the draw and beat 2 Grand Slam champions on consecutive days. She walked into Miami as an afterthought and walked out as the most talked about player on the planet. The noise that surrounded her matches at that tournament was the first time the wider world got a true sense of what the Eala effect actually looks like when it arrives at full force. The Filipino community in Florida mobilized. The stands were packed, the flags were out. The atmosphere was unlike anything that particular tournament had produced in years. And by the time she finally lost to Jessica Pegula in the semifinals, the conversation had already moved on from whether she was a nice story to whether she was the future of the sport. Fast forward to 2026, and the answer to that question has become impossible to deny. Eala rose to a career-high world ranking of number 31 in the latest WTA rankings released on Monday, February 23rd, following her run to the quarterfinals of the Dubai Tennis Championships, a WTA 1000 tournament. That Dubai campaign was the moment that confirmed everything the tennis world had started to suspect. She highlighted her Dubai run with a stunning win over world number 8 Jasmine Paolini in the round of 16 before pushing her campaign to the quarterfinals, ultimately falling to world number 4 Coco Gauff. And throughout every single match she played in that tournament, the scenes in the stands told a story that no ranking number could fully capture. Buoyed by the cheers of Filipino fans who packed the Aviation Club Tennis Center whenever she played, Eala reached the last 8 of a WTA tournament for only the second time after making the semifinals of the 2025 Miami Open. The stands were not just full, they were electric. They were alive with a kind of passion that you cannot manufacture, cannot stage, and cannot replicate. It has to come from something genuine. It has to come from a community that sees itself in a player and responds accordingly. And now that community is coming to California, in numbers that have left tournament officials with their mouths hanging open. California is home to the largest Filipino diaspora in the entire United States. Cities like Daly City, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, Carson, and Vallejo have enormous and deeply rooted Filipino communities that have been building lives on the American West Coast for generations. These are not casual observers of professional tennis. These are people who have been watching the sport with increasing intensity over the past 12 months, specifically because of one reason. Alex Eala exists, and Alex Eala is winning. The fan clubs are already organized. The community leaders are already in contact. The convoys from Los Angeles to Palm Springs are already being discussed and planned. The flags are already being printed. The chants are already being rehearsed. This is not spontaneous enthusiasm that might or might not materialize when the matches begin. This is coordinated, passionate, intentional mobilization from a community that has decided in no uncertain terms that they will make their presence felt in the California desert in the most visible and audible way possible. Tournament organizers at Indian Wells are reportedly watching ticket sales and hospitality bookings with a mixture of excitement and mild panic. The surge in interest from the Filipino demographic is something they have not previously encountered at this scale. For the first time in her young career, Eala enters a WTA 1000 tournament as a seeded player, a distinction that grants her a first-round bye and a direct place in the round of 64 at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden in California. That seeded status is not just a tactical advantage, it is a statement. It means Alexandra Eala has earned her place among the elite of the sport through the weight of her results and her ranking points, not through a wildcard invitation or a lucky draw. She is here because she belongs here. And the financial reality of what that means for the tournament is playing out in real time on the secondary ticket market, where prices for sessions in which Eala is expected to feature have already started climbing well above their face value. The Eala effect is not just cultural. It is economic. It is reshaping the commercial landscape of every tournament she enters, from the food vendors to the luxury hospitality suites, and Indian Wells is no exception. On the Nothing Major podcast, former world number 9 Sam Querrey asked whether Eala was the biggest draw in women's tennis right now in the world, and Steve Johnson replied, yes. Querrey pushed further, asking whether she was bigger than Sabalenka and bigger than Coco, and Johnson again replied yes, describing her impact as crazy. And then Johnson reached for the most apt comparison available to him. He said what Eala is doing right now is essentially the same thing that João Fonseca did on the men's side of the game last year in Miami, when his matches had to be relocated, because the crowds showing up for him exceeded what the assigned courts could handle. Johnson described it as being like Fonseca, but bigger than Fonseca, noting that Eala had already appeared on the cover of Vogue and was playing well. Think about what that comparison actually means. Fonseca is one of the most hyped young players to emerge in men's tennis in years. His crowd impact in Miami last year was considered remarkable and unprecedented for a player of his age and ranking. And Johnson is sitting there telling his audience on a professional podcast that what Eala is doing is already bigger than that. Not comparable to it, bigger. John Isner, a man who spent nearly 2 decades competing at the top level of professional tennis and who has seen virtually every crowd phenomenon the sport has produced in recent times, backed Johnson up completely. Isner said the crowds for Eala are everywhere, describing the Philippines as a huge market that a lot of people underestimated, noting that they finally have a star on the women's side of the game. That word, finally, carries an enormous amount of weight if you understand the context behind it. The Philippines is a country of approximately 115 million people. It is a nation with a deep and passionate love of sport. Filipino communities exist literally everywhere on earth, from the United States to the Middle East to Europe to Southeast Asia, and those communities are deeply, fiercely loyal to their own. But professional tennis, until very recently, had given them nobody to rally around at the elite level. Nobody to make the sport feel like theirs. Nobody who carried the Philippine flag onto the biggest courts in the world and competed at the absolute highest level. And then Alex Eala arrived, and the floodgates opened, and Isner, watching it unfold in real time as a professional analyst with decades of experience, is telling his audience that the people who run professional tennis fundamentally underestimated how large and how hungry that market actually is. Now, here's the part of this story that makes the Indian Wells chapter particularly extraordinary. Eala is currently in Oregon, where she visited the Nike World headquarters, which displayed portraits of some of her career highlights. Specifically, she walked through the famous Nike Tunnel, a space where the world's biggest sports brand celebrates the greatest athletes in its history, and she found her own image displayed there among them. The lingering question will be if Nike does anything special for her to commemorate her Indian Wells debut, given that the brand sent her a custom white hair tie containing a sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, for her Wimbledon debut, and that shirts containing the Nike logo and the sampaguita are routinely sold out in the Philippines. This is not a peripheral brand relationship. This is Nike, the largest sports brand on the planet, treating Alexandra Eala as a centerpiece of their tennis identity. The visit to Oregon sent images flooding across social media that have become rocket fuel for the already massive excitement building among Filipino fans in California. Seeing their champion walking through the halls of the Nike empire with her own career milestones celebrated on the walls beside the legends of the sport is the kind of imagery that unites communities and amplifies passion in ways that no marketing campaign could replicate. The tactical picture heading into Indian Wells is equally compelling for anyone who follows the sport closely. The milestone of being a seeded player comes after Eala surged to a career-best world number 31 at the tournament's February 23rd seeding cutoff, placing her comfortably inside the top 32. The jump marks her official arrival among the tour's elite, turning Indian Wells from a proving ground into a stage where expectations now follow. Pro football. That distinction between proving ground and stage where expectations follow is exactly the right way to frame what has happened in Eala's career over the past 12 months. She spent 2025 proving she could compete at the elite level. She spent the early weeks of 2026 confirming it. And now she arrives in Indian Wells no longer as the underdog trying to cause an upset, but as a seeded competitor who the top players genuinely do not want to draw in the early rounds. Because facing Alex Eala in a packed stadium full of thousands of screaming Filipino fans, in a match that the entire Philippines is watching live from Manila, with the full weight of the Eala effect pressing down on every single point, is a nightmare scenario for any opponent regardless of their ranking. The psychological dimension of playing against her in these conditions is something that money and ranking points simply cannot prepare you for. After Indian Wells, Eala's North American swing continues with a return to the Miami Open later in March, the venue where she made headlines last year by reaching the semifinals as a wild card, a run that sparked her rapid climb up the rankings. That breakthrough now feels less like a surprise and more like a prelude. Pro football. The Miami Open is the tournament where this entire story began for the wider world. It is the place where a wild card from the Philippines defeated 3 Grand Slam champions and introduced herself to a global audience that had no idea what was coming. And she is going back as a seeded player, with a career-high ranking, with the momentum of a Dubai quarterfinal behind her, with the backing of the largest sports brand on earth, and with the Filipino diaspora of an entire continent mobilizing to be there in the stands when she walks onto that court. The sequel to Miami 2025 is shaping up to be everything the original was, and then some. Eala described her 3-week stretch in the Middle East as one of the most meaningful of her career, fueled by what she called full-blown support from fans who saw themselves reflected in her journey, quoting fellow pro Sabrina Santamaria in saying, "It is a privilege to play in front of people who see themselves in you." That quote is the entire story in a single sentence. It is the quote that explains the Eala phenomenon more completely than any statistic or ranking number ever could. When you play in front of people who see themselves in you, you are not just competing in a tennis match. You are carrying something much larger and much heavier and much more meaningful than a tennis racket. You are carrying the identity and the pride and the dreams of an entire community. And when that community shows up in the kind of numbers that Alexandra Eala consistently draws, the energy that creates is something that transcends the sport entirely and becomes a cultural moment in its own right. The WTA Tour itself is still catching up to what is happening. The scheduling decisions, the court assignments, the crowd management protocols that were adequate for any other player in the draw are simply not adequate for the events that surround Alex Eala wherever she competes. We have already seen this play out in Melbourne, where her early round match was placed on a court too small for the crowd that gathered to watch her. We have seen it in Doha and Dubai, where the atmosphere inside the venue during her matches was described by multiple observers as being unlike anything they had experienced at those tournaments before. And we are about to see it in Indian Wells, where the Filipino community of California is larger, more organized, and more motivated than any crowd Eala has yet played in front of. The Indian Wells Tennis Garden holds over 16,000 people at its main stadium. And the people arriving to fill it for Alexandra Eala's matches are not going to be filling it quietly. The tournament champion stands to earn 1,000 ranking points and a winner's check of $1.15 million, stakes that underline why Indian Wells is viewed as a bellwether for the rest of the season. For Eala, the significance runs deeper than prize money or points. A solid showing could push her into the top 30 for the first time, further cementing her transition from rising prospect to consistent threat on tour. Pro football. Every round Eala advances in California pushes her further up a rankings ladder that 12 months ago she had not yet begun to seriously climb. The mathematics of her situation heading into the spring swing are genuinely exciting. With strong results at Indian Wells and Miami, she has the opportunity to enter the top 20 in the world for the first time in her career, a milestone that would rewrite the record books for Southeast Asian tennis and send the kind of signal to the WTA establishment that would be impossible to ignore or downplay. The field waiting for her in California is star-studded and formidable by any measure. This year's field is headlined by familiar powerhouses such as Aryna Sabalenka, Iga Swiatek, Elena Rybakina, Coco Gauff, Jessica Pegula, Amanda Anisimova, Jasmine Paolini, and defending champion Mira Andreeva. Pro football. These are the best players in the world, and they are all converging on the same desert location for what promises to be one of the most competitive fields assembled at a non-Grand Slam event in recent memory. But here is what makes this particular draw so fascinating from Eala's perspective. Every single one of those players is aware of what the Eala effect means. Every single one of them has either seen footage from Melbourne and Dubai, or heard the podcast clips from Sam Querrey and Steve Johnson, or read the match reports describing what happens in a stadium when Alexandra Eala walks on court. And not one of them is going to find it comfortable to step across the net from her with thousands of Filipino voices shaking the desert air with every point. That psychological weight is real. That pressure does not disappear because you are ranked higher in the world rankings. If anything, it intensifies because the expectation is that you should win, while the atmosphere is telling you in no uncertain terms that the crowd believes otherwise.